I'm joined now by Ron Cregan, who's a packaging designer, and there are interesting things going on in the world of packaging design. For example, there was a time when you might have designed cigarette packets, not anymore, because the government designs cigarette packets now, and this may be the thin end of the wedge. Am I right there, Ron?
I think you probably are. We're just on the... tobacco was probably the first product that government really kind of grappled with in terms of its design skills. But its radar has now extended into things like alcohol and sugar and all the other things that government thinks that potentially might be bad for us.
So, is your company called Endangered Species, or you've set up a website?
Yeah, it's probably more of a movement, and and I came up with the idea of the name of Endangered Species with a very good friend of mine, Mark Bukowski, who's a lovely chap. But
it's a friend of the show. He comes on every Friday, and a friend of mine. A friend of mine.
Very good. And he's a probably, if I describe it, if he doesn't mind, a libertarian. He comes from the kind of creative industries as I do, and it's very much just a movement which is about trying to encourage debate and discussion, as we're having now, about the difference between legislation and education, which is, government telling us to do one thing, but us actually as responsible adults and parents doing something different.
So we know now, Ron, we've seen the cigarette packets, which are sort of were for a time, I think, blank, but are now full of pictures of the terrible diseases you can catch when you or come down with from heavy smoking or long-term smoking. Now, you think that syndrome, the either blank packaging or the warning packaging, is going to soon spread to alcohol? That when we buy a bottle of booze, it'll have the same kind of things on the bottle warning us?
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, as an Irishman, although I haven't lived there for about 30 years, but as an Irishman, before, in Ireland they have an upper house and a lower house, as we have here. The current Prime Minister in Ireland has put a bill before the upper house, which is about creating label areas on alcohol packaging of 1/3 of the label area, which should be a cancer warning, effectively. Quite a lot, if you can imagine the kind of size of that on a nice bottle of wine or a nice bottle of whiskey or something. That's quite a lot of space that would be kind of devoted, including the current regulatory labelling areas, which is all the stat information. You'll end up with probably half the area of the bottle being effectively kind of carcinogenic and health warning.
Ron, we've got some problems with the line. You keep going very, very loud and then very, very quiet. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to some messages now and try and sort the line out, and we can continue this fascinating conversation when the messages are over. So stick around, we'll try and sort this problem out. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, this is Love Sport.
It's good that the UK are cutting down on plastics. It means we get less people like Katie Price. She's pretty much made of pure plastic.
Love Sport Breakfast with Ian Stone.
The clash of those two and how awesome that was, that competitiveness, there's nothing been like it.
It'll be interesting to see, because since Ferguson's retired, him and Wenger's relationship has blossomed as such.
Mate, they sit on the sofa watching films now.
They'll be on Gogglebox next time. But,
Celebrity Gogglebox with Arsene Wenger and Alex Ferguson.
Arsene, what do you think of that bit? I didn't see it, Alex.
Weekdays from 6 a.m. This is Love Sport.
I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is Love Sport. I'm still talking to Ron Cregan, who's a packaging designer. He started a movement called Endangered Species, because it may be that people like Ron are an endangered species, because already cigarette package design, in this country at least, has been handed over to the government as they warn us of the dangers of smoking cigarettes and stick horrible pictures of nasty diseases all over the packets. And there's a proposal in Ireland now to start doing that on bottles of wine and I presume whiskey, etc., etc. And you feel that this is a kind of unstoppable force, Ron? And hello.
Yes, I'm still here.
That's better.
Sorry, I'm just picking up on it. The interesting pieces of legislation around the world, for instance, The alcohol issue is very one that's important in Ireland because it's actually in front of government. We have things like in the UK, Marks and Spencer's removing photography of cheese products for many of their retail units, which are in an NHS trust space, because allegedly, for instance, cheese is bad for you and unhealthy. Or dairy products are bad and unhealthy. We also have in California, coffee is reckoned by the state of California to be a carcinogen. So therefore, if you sell coffee, you have to have a health warning with it. I know this is kind of getting ridiculous. The fun bit of this is that myself and an Irishman who's much better known than I am, called Richard Corrigan.
Oh, I know. Richard, the restaurateur, yes?
Yes.
I know Richard,
over a glass of wine one night, decided that the Irish coffee was probably now the most toxic drink in the world because it contains...
It's got whiskey and coffee in it, yeah?
Correct, and dairy and sugar. I mean, can you imagine something that could be more toxic than that?
So you should have when you get an Irish coffee, there should be a warning with it that by the time you finish this drink, you will definitely be dead.
Correct. Exactly. We thought it was quite entertaining, yeah.
But to be more serious, Ron, I mean, there's something... I mean, first of all, you know, people have to earn a living. The wheels of commerce have to continue to turn, don't they? And the more governments do this about products involving, obviously, alcohol, tobacco, cheese, sugar, the more difficult it is for people to make money, to make profits, to keep people employed. Don't governments realise they may be committing a kind of economic suicide here?
I'm not sure that they realise, but one of the things that in my experience with government is that legislation is quite cost effective. It doesn't take an awful lot to kind of create legislation in terms of don't do that, which sometimes comes under the expression of nanny state, as in putting up signs of don't walk on the grass. However, education is quite difficult and expensive because you actually have to get people to tell other people kind of stories about why you should change your behaviour. And education, the responsibility can be quite difficult and quite expensive. So I think it's expedient for certain people in the government to make a name for themselves by flag-waving simple pieces of legislation and becoming kind of, in some ways, kind of recognised for doing that and, in fact, not really doing anything.
Has this, with cigarette packets, you know, you now pick them up. I have some friends, you know, they have like different conditions, you know, so one packet will have throat cancer, another will have lung cancer, and there'll be all these pictures, and there'll be pictures of teeth fall out. I have friends, smoking friends, and they collect them, you know, so they swap to see if they can get the full set. So they don't take it that seriously. Has this been effective? Has it reduced the number of people smoking, or to have people just carried on smoking with gay abandon?
Interesting enough, I think the real statistics are coming back from Australia, and the real statistics are that there has been, as in alcohol consumption, a natural decline in the number of people smoking naturally. They're just kind of smoking less. That trend has kind of continued, but the incidence of plain packaging hasn't actually affected or speeded up that change. One of the things that it has done is it's opened up the market to counterfeit products. So actually, tobacco products that aren't actually legitimate or manufactured by, and these are kind of made in other countries, let's say. And a lot of it is being used to fund criminality, I suppose, is probably the best way to express it.
Is this move towards plain packaging, and as we've discussed, it's not actually often that plain. It's worse than that. It's literally packaging to put you off buying these things. Is it a kind of Puritanism that's creeping into government all over the world?
Well, I think there is that kind of sense of it, particularly if you kind of go to alcohol, and none of us that are alive remember Prohibition, but we've probably all seen it in movies with
the Untouchables and all that. Yeah.
Correct, yeah, but it was absolutely ineffective. I mean, what we're talking about, and what I'm interested in, is people making the right decisions for themselves as responsible parents and adults, rather than being told and legislated by a kind of nanny state or by a kind of member of government who has an agenda which is kind of, about self-promotion as opposed to proper education.
Yeah, it's a kind of a form of governmental virtue signalling, isn't it? If it's not that effective, it's just governments or politicians trying to show, look how great we are, we're trying to stop people smoking, even though they know it's not that effective. So they're just flag waving about how great they are, aren't they?
Yeah, I think your expression flag waving is very, very good. Flag waving or point scoring or being seen to do something as opposed to actually really doing something. So it's very much about kind of, media coverage and look what I have done. We had minimum pricing of alcohol in Scotland, which I don't know what the statistics will be on, but obviously will affect people with the people with the least amount of money. And in reality, the truth is that the people that are consuming the most alcohol are the people with the most wealth.
So with all this, Ron, this increasing tendency for all the stuff that we like to be kind of, if not banned, we're very much discouraged. We're discouraged from smoking, we're discouraged from drinking, we're discouraged from eating sugar, cheese, all the stuff we like. I mean, are we witnessing the death of pleasure?
I think that's a lovely expression that you just used.
I nicked it from you.
Well, I think it's kind of, the death of pleasure is about, almost about kind of living in a society where you're being told more about what you can't do rather than you can do. I was lucky enough to kind of go to art school and earn living as a designer, to come up and use my imagination to design and create things that give people, both visual and physical pleasure in terms of, lovely shape of a bottle. Or there's nothing more celebratory than, gorgeous bottle of champagne with a label on your birthday and things like that, But removing all of these lovely pleasures from life seems to be very, very kind of draconian or sanctimonious, and there seems to be a kind of almost a religious undertone to it, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that worries me particularly about smoking, and I guess drinking, which we're told, on an almost hourly basis will kill us, it's terrible, but these activities, they're not illegal. And if governments are so horrendously opposed to the horror of smoking, why don't they make cigarettes illegal? I'll tell you why, because they make loads and loads of tax money off them, right?
I agree, and it's also very, very good what you call kind of deflective strategy. So if you take the NHS, for instance, which is under serious kind of under-financing issues at the moment, rather than addressing the problems on the ground in the NHS in terms of funding, it's much easier to kind of rant on television about sugar tax, for instance, and how the fact is that we're all eating too much sugar, and it's making us all too obese, and therefore we're putting pressure on the NHS. So rather than the government taking responsibility, they're telling you and me that we're the ones that are breaking the NHS. Well, the reality is that it's underfunded.
Yes, exactly. Well, I'll tell you what, Ron, I've got 20 minutes left of this show, and as soon as the show's finished, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go and have a drink. And there won't be any signs on it warning me not to have that drink. Great talking to you, Ron. Come and talk to us again about this. It's very interesting. That's Ron Cregan, who runs an organisation called the Endangered Species, and he designs packages, and they're going out of business increasingly thanks to government measures. I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and this is Love Sport.